being late. Something has just screwed up in my calendar, but I'm glad to be here. It's a gorgeous day. And I thank you for all coming in from this gorgeous weather. I hadn't been out until now, so it's wonderful. I thank Jerry. I thank SEIU and all of the labor movement for the support that you've been giving to children over the years. Our first lifeline of hope in Washington came from the UAW and the Citizens Crusade for Children against poverty, that Walter Reuther had set up a coalition. And when they were trying to kill the Head Start program, the Child Development Group of Mississippi, Dick Boone and others were a lifeline. When we were continuing to try to protect Head Start, I went up to, and the Congress, or the conservatives were trying to block grant it or kill it. I went and got my first big political lesson in Washington when I went to visit John Bradamus, who was chair then of the House Education Committee, and I told him all these wonderful things that we were doing with poor people in Mississippi through the Child Development Group of Mississippi, and we could not have this block grant. It would destroy everything and let Senator Eastland and Stennis win. And he said, who are your troops and what are you for? Which was a great question, so I went to figure out who our troops were. And so the next time I went to John Radamus, I took my labor friends, Ebby Dubrow and Jane O'Grady and the UAW lobbyists, and our first full-time lobbyist was Dick Warden, so that the labor movement has been a source of support from the beginning, and we love SEIU, and I want to embarrass Jerry and just thank him very much for what he did with us last summer in enabling us through SIE support to go and take 8 busloads of young black people during Mississippi Freedom Summer Celebration up to Philadelphia, Mississippi, to retrace the last day of these 3 young men. And I had been exorcising one demon at a time, and I had not gone back to Philadelphia. I'd been in Philadelphia many times, but since I had left there, and I went back too to try to exorcise my demons. There was no federal court there, so therefore I wasn't spending a lot of time in there in my last years. And I tell you, it is so important that we remember our history, and I knew in general what went on there, and many of the people who were engaged in those murders were still there on Dyke Bridge Road. But we got out with those young people and with one of James Chaney's sisters and heard the details of how they were killed. I don't know if I've conveyed this to you, Jerry, but it was so horrifying as it was told from all the stories that had been put together, and as young people heard it, I hope and know that none of us will ever, ever forget it, and that we will never let it be repeated again. And while we talk a lot about STEM literacy and reading literacy and math literacy, I'm more concerned about historical literacy, because I think we're at a very dangerous point in our country. And I just want to tell you how grateful I am. And then my guilt was to realize that we had 200 freedom schools around the country, but we didn't have one in honor and in memory of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. And so I came back begging again. And thanks to you at SEIU and Jerry, we're going to have a freedom school. It's called the Cheney, Goodman, Schwerner Freedom School. And all of the children in that community will begin to learn their real history. You would never know anything happened from what is being taught to the school children in that county. And so I'm just grateful very much for your stewardship and others. We just issued a new report on child poverty and how we want to end it right now, can end it right now, can't afford not to end it right now. It is a moral disgrace that we have 14.7 million children in the world's largest economy who are living in poverty, 6.5 million of them living in extreme poverty. And it's going to be our undoing. I feel like a broken record going on all the time to say that our greatest national economic and military security problem is not from the enemy, any enemy without. It's from our failure to invest in our children right now. So we asked the Urban Institute to take 9 programs that we knew work and ask them to quantify the poverty alleviation impact if we fully funded them now, and what could that do? And they came back, and what would it cost? And they came back and told us that if we invested in things that made work pay, and in work, minimum wage, fundable child tax credits, earned income tax credit, and all of there, and the report is up on the web, that we could decrease child poverty now by 60%, and black child poverty by 72%. The cost would be $77 billion, about 2% of the federal budget. but that's a bargain because it cost us about $500 billion every year that we let 13, 14, 15 million children live in poverty. And so we are determined to mount a massive campaign to end poverty, to make work available, to make work pay, and to stop this absolute travesty of having our children grow up without enough to eat, without a place to sleep, without the stability of knowing that they live in a country that cares about them. Dr. King, I quote all the time because in his last week and then in his last day, he had called his mother to give her his next Sunday sermon title. And it was Why America May Go to Hell. And at his death, as you know, which is the origin and the parent organization of the Children's Defense Fund, he was calling for a Poor People's Campaign to do away with poverty. And it was a major turning point because it was the first cross-racial attempt to move beyond narrow civil rights into economic rights, which involved blacks, whites, Latinos, Native Americans, and that was an important turning point, and it is one which we seek to continue to live today in building a constituency for all children, but paying particular attention to the children who are at the bottom, children of color. I just cannot bear to keep saying that after a transforming children's rights, civil rights movement, that the black child is still the poorest child in America, with 51.3% of us poor, of our children being poor. Shame on us. And we've got to change that, and we've got to change it with the sense of urgency, and that the younger children are, the poorer they are. In the years of early brain development, and a lot of it goes back to what I did in Mississippi and seeing the extraordinary transformational impact of the Child Development Group for the first time. The Head Start program, which the state turned down, and we try to keep that built into everything we can. The obscenity of states turning down Medicaid expansions to give health care and billions of dollars and jobs through that program to their people is one we've tried to kind of avoid, and so we try to build in the safety valve. But because Head Start and the poverty program did build in that, when the state turned it down, community groups, church groups, we were able to apply for it. And it was an absolute revolution because after the summer project of 1964, which everybody knows about, everybody left. SNCC left, and they all went off to try to not go into jail because they were conscientious objectors. The volunteers all left. And what we were left with in Mississippi in the fall and winter of '64 and in 1965 was massive hunger. The state wanted to move people to get out of there, go away, and they were starving them out, so they transferred from the summer feeding program, from the summer commodities program, or the regular commodities program, over to food stamps, charged $2, and people had no income. And so there was no way for them to get food. They were really pushing them off of plantations in every way they could. The violence continued. And then this nice Head Start program came. It's the only time Bob Moses and I ever had a fight. I think he's one of the most courageous, visionary people I know. But he did not want us to take federal money. And when the state turned it down, and the community groups were trying to get together to apply for it, he told me that was a very bad idea, and it would sap the independence of these folk. But I said, Bob, they got to eat. They got to have a place. They've got to have a way to survive. We applied for it and ran the largest Head Start program in the nation, and it was absolutely key to the next stage after the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and the convention in Atlantic City, because we created 3,000 new jobs for people who had been pushed off plantations, who had no place to go. It was a middle class, and that's where the leadership that created what they now boast on. We have the largest number of elected officials, black elected officials in the country from Mississippi came, but all of our wonderful, rebellious, brave, courageous people like Unity Blackwell and Miss Fannie Lou Hamer and Miss May Bertha Carter, they got jobs. And they had independence, and they were able to learn with their children how to read and see their children in books that they'd never seen, the portrayal of multicultural books in that summer. And it gave them the freedom to organize, and that was parallel with the growth of citizenship schools, which were just beginning. And so the combination of the Child Development Group plus the continuing beginning work through the citizenship schools led to the revolution that I think was so important, but it was immediately attacked. And And Senator Sanders tried to kill it, but it was the key to the next level of transition and to organizing in a period that was otherwise hopeless. And it's a shame to see it come back again. The hunger is back. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is retracing Dr. King's steps to Marx and Robert Kennedy's steps up to the Mississippi Delta, and see how we can begin to get some greater response. And 2 or 3 of the areas where we've got to have greater public investment is in food. There's a 100% funded federal food program, but there's a 90% drop between school lunches and school breakfasts and the summer feeding program, and kids are starving and they're hungry. Not in the sense in which they were then. It comes out as obesity and other things, but there's this huge drop. And on Monday mornings, I get stories sometime from our Mississippi office saying how children at the bus drivers late and they miss breakfast after a weekend of having no food or very little food. They just cry. And how they've strategically figured out how to stand in line and figured out which of their classmates don't like which kinds of meals so that they're right there when it's left on the plate, so that they can walk in. That should not exist in this country, and we've got to end it, and we've got to have a massive campaign to give every child hope. I read in the Washington Post that the United Kingdom, whose economy, if it were an American state, would rank just above Mississippi, but that it had made a commitment, and I was in England recently, to end child poverty by half, or cut it by half over 10 years, and they seem to have a different set of values and political will to move this ahead, though I've just come back, and with the Tories, they're just one era, homeless people are everywhere. You can just see the backslide, and we're going to see that too if we don't make sure that we elect people here who are going to be committed to investing in our people. But we know what to do. I mean, the things that we're doing, and states are already doing the minimum wage, the tax credits, the housing subsidies have the largest anti-poverty impact. But the bottom line is, how do we make it happen? We know it's too expensive to continue. We need to talk about the trade-offs and weigh off the variety of ways in which we could pay for what we propose in these 9 steps that we want to try to take immediately. And I hope that we can begin to mobilize. I mean, we don't have a money problem. We have a will and a voice and an organizational problem, and it's time for the kind of strategic movement that simply will not go away, that says we're not going to let our children go hungry again, and we're not going to let our children go without shelter, and we're going to get an early childhood system in place, since we know that those investments in the early years make such a difference. And think about how many jobs it would create if we had a comprehensive early childhood system through kindergarten. And so one of our key goals, in addition to the proposals that we've made in this Ending Child Poverty study, is that we would invest in a high-quality early childhood system that is through kindergarten. We all know about the Common Core standards, but only 11 states have full-day kindergarten, so we're going to start holding poor children accountable for what we don't give them the means to succeed in. And so, but I think and one of the things we're trying to do, Jerry, I've tried to get some economists, if we did put into place a high-quality early childhood investment system from before birth. We've been making progress on health care and Medicaid and CHIP, though we've got a way to go. How many jobs would that create if you had a universal, high-quality early childhood system bolstered by home visiting and all the other up through age 5? And the president, and if you had a strong early child care system, and that's one of the 9 programs that we had investment, how many jobs would that create? At what cost and at what savings? And it's been very hard to find economists who want to do that. Tchaikovsky had come in with a bill, and she'd laid out some of this, but we need to do it very systematically. If we had full-term, we know about summer learning loss, and that's about freedom schools, and we know that the average poor child loses 2 to 3 months in achievement in the summer, but what if we had a full-year, high-quality freedom school program for every child, or a good quality program so we stop summer learning loss? How many jobs would that create for the community? If we had an after-school program that was universal and of high quality, how many public sector, we got to have a public sector job discussion here. And we know we can do that, and we will meet some extraordinary needs that all of our children have. And so I do hope that we can work together to sort of cost out this and make the case that we already know we can't afford not to do this. It's going to be far cheaper to invest and to create hope. CDF began in many ways out of the Poor People's Campaign when we had riots that were right after Dr. King's death, and I went out into the schools to tell children not to riot and not to get arrested and not to loot. A little boy about 12 looked me straight in the eye and said, "Lady, what future? I ain't got no future to lose. I ain't got nothing to lose." After Katrina, I went into the schools in Houston to talk to children who had gone from New Orleans over to Houston and to see what their priorities were and what I could tell the country about them. And we did 2 reports on Katrina's children. And it was really a big sense of it was just total despair. But a little boy about 9 looked at me and said, "Tell the country that we need hope." And these rights about hopelessness. We've made a lot of progress through the investments in a variety of public sector programs. We've made great progress in health coverage and Head Start and child care. It's been a struggle for 40 years, but there are many, many, many programs on the books, but we've got to get to the next phase. And how about youth employment and youth service programs, and how many jobs, and how much hope could we instill? And so I hope we can join with you in coalition to really make this happen. This is not rocket science. We know what to do. The question is, how do we create the political will? And all of us talk about movement. We've got to build a movement. We really do have to build a movement. We have to define it. It has to be strategic. It has to be here to stay for a while. It takes a long time to get things done. And I am just deeply grateful with the partnership and the investment that SEIU and others are making in freedom schools over the last 20 years plus. 125,000 children, K-12, have gone through these summer freedom schools from the poorest communities. We have about 200 of them, and they're growing. And they, the person that runs all of our youth leadership programs now came out, she started as a freedom school kid in 7th grade. There have been about 15,000 college students who teach in these freedom schools, and it's hard for children to be what they can't see, but their teachers who are college students come from their communities, and about 1/3 to 1/2 of them are black males and Latina males every year. And so it's really, the role modeling is terrific, and many of them are changing their majors to become teachers. It's an unexpected consequence to see a new teacher pipeline from these young people. And when I told Jerry, when I opened up the paper the other day and saw the banner unfurling in Baltimore, there were 3 of our Ella Baker trainers, the one who'd worked their way up. We've been, thanks to the support of many of you in this room, we've been celebrating high school students who beat the odds. They go through hell, but they can make it. Their resilience is amazing. We've got about 800 of them, and they're the pick of the litter. And freedom schools work in every place, and I guess I will just end to say that our big investment now is to create that critical mass of young people who, while we've still got enough of our elders alive, like Jim, we missed Vince Harding, but Dolores Huerta and Jim Lawson and a pool of them are coming down to Haley Farm to train these young people in strategic nonviolent organizing. It's not the same terrain as it was in the 60s. I mean, we've got a lot of new challenges, but we've got to figure it out, and we've got to create a new network of servant leaders who are committed to the community, because too many of us have mixed up personal access with community outcome. And we've got to create folk who understand that it's not about us, and it is about service. But we've got an extraordinarily exciting pool of that. And so I hope we can get freedom schools everywhere. We've got them in homeless shelters. We've got them in secure detention facilities. And so if I had to say, we got to get every child born healthy. Children don't come in pieces, and good policy should be like good parenting. And so we're trying to get every child born healthy, and we've made enormous strides in the expansion of Medicaid and CHIP with the help of the labor movement, and I'm grateful. We are now getting home visiting off in a pretty good trajectory. We've got to speed it up. We've got to get that high quality early childhood system, and even though Head Start has been expanded and Early Head Start has been expanded, we've got to get every child quality care through kindergarten. Then we've got to get every school expecting and helping every child to learn, and we've got to get after school and summer so that they have places to go, and all of those are jobs. But we want people who love children, and I'm trying to get everybody to stay out of law school and everybody to go to education school, but I'm telling everybody to get out of the classroom if they don't love and respect children, because that is absolutely the key. And we know what to do to save our children. I'm just going to end with a very brief thing, because we have pack racks in my family, and I tell Noah's Ark story all the time, and an old scrap came in my door with my mail from my sister about everything you need to know in life you learn from Noah's Ark. And so the first one was don't miss the boat. And the country really is going to miss the boat because the key to our economic and national and military security is in these little children who are non-white today, and they're going to be, a majority going to be non-white in our school systems. And so we may not like them, but we're going to need them. And it's better to invest in them than to continue to ignore them and to let them be savaged by violence and ignorance and hopelessness. And the second, which is really akin to that, which I've already alluded to, is that we're all in the same boat. And we can't separate out America's future from the majority of its folk, and we've got to break up the new apartheid that is developing from mass incarceration, from 80% illiteracy, from our non-white children. And so we're all in the same boat, and we're going to go down in that same boat if we don't begin to steer it in a new direction. The third is to plan ahead. In this quick fix, profit-oriented culture, we are always thinking about the next quarter. But it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark, and I'm sure everybody thought he was crazy. But he was trying to see ahead, and so we've got to plan ahead, and the planning ahead is making sure that we answer all the forces of aggression today and not leave it for our children and grandchildren to have to refight these battles, because I'm really afraid we're in the beginning of a second post-Reconstruction era, and we need to wake up. We need to wake up, folk, and we need to fight back and together and strategically. And I'll skip a couple of the other lessons, but my favorite is, remember that the Ark was built by amateurs and the Titanic was built by experts. And we're all waiting around for another Dr. King or for experts to come in, and the high techies are going to come in and do this new movement for us. Dr. King never started a single movement. He responded to what came out of communities, and he could encapsulate our dreams, and he's not coming back. And that's why the importance of youth servant leadership is so important. We were so lucky. I always felt like I was the luckiest person in the world, been born who I was, when I was, at the intersection of great historic events, but great historic leaders who nurtured us as leaders. And I thought back of how much time Dr. King would spend one-on-one and in small groups walking with us and talking with us and struggling with us, and how he would listen every night for 3 hours to Stokely as he, during the Meredith March, as he was screaming about how bad it was and trying to keep him off. But he spent enormous amounts of time with us. And I was 21 years old, went down to Mississippi for the first time, trying to figure out why I should stay in law school, which I hated. I was picked up at the airport by Medgar Evers, taken home to have lunch, to have dinner with Merle and the children. He drove me 90 miles up to Greenwood, Mississippi, so I could hook up with the SNCC office, and drove back 90 miles that night. I mean, who does that today with our young people? And when I look back at the role models that I was personally exposed to, the good side of segregation was that Dr. Mays had to stay at our house when he came to speak at our church, because there was no place for him to stay in the town. And Langston Hughes got dropped off at my segregated schoolhouse because the poor white minister, when he got off the train going to Atlanta University, was so terrified when this black man walked in and said, "I'd gotten your name from somebody." He immediately got him in the car, drove him over to the black principal's house. But that meant we got to hear Langston Hughes. And he was in a hurry, and he said he had to go to AU, but he would come back. He came back, and he read to us. And so we need to figure out how we're going to make sure that we transmit this extraordinary rich legacy of struggle and transformation and success. And if Miss May Bertha Carter and Unita Blackwell and Miss Fannie Lou Hamer could do what they did with almost nothing, but the courage and the concern that their children have a better future, we can do that too. So let's get that movement together and move it along. Thank you.